Let's go to Daniel from Cheshire, who asks, is Kemi Badenoch likely to make a better leader of the opposition than Robert Jenrick, despite seemingly being less suited to being Prime Minister?
I don't. Yes,
a bit of a loaded question there.
There's a lot to unpack from that.
David, you've voted, haven't you?
I have voted. So
would you like to share with the studio?
Yes, exclusively. So I waited until the very last day of the contest, and I voted for Kemi Badenoch, not without reservations. So she's not someone who, at the beginning of this process, I expected to be voting for. I rejoined the Conservative Party in July for the purposes of voting in this election.
Fair to say not to vote for either Kemi Badenoch or
yes,
Robert
I think
Jenrick.
that is true. So I looked at it and thought, I'm between Mel Stride and Tom Tugendhat, and then Mel Stride gets knocked out, and then Tom Tugendhat gets knocked out. At which point I thought, well, I'll vote for James Cleverly. He looks as if he's going to be in the final two, and then James got knocked out, so I was left between the two. Robert, who actually I know Robert better than I know Kemi, and I've always liked him actually at an individual level. But he has a very clear political strategy. It is all focused on reform voters, and essentially he wants to turn the Conservative Party, as far as I can see, into not even reform light. I think sometimes reform heavy, and that's not for me. And certainly his policy on the European Convention on Human Rights, I have got huge difficulties with that.
Do you think he's genuine? I mean, it's not the position that he's always held, is it?
It's not. I do think that his views changed when he was in the Home Office. I mean, he seemed to, Rishi Sunak sent him there to keep an eye on Suella Braverman, and then I think he became so focused on this immigration issue, and his campaign is so focused on the immigration issue. It's almost a single issue campaign, and that's so. I know that there's some question as to is he being sort of politically sly and is it all about positioning? But I think I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that there's sincerity there. In fact, maybe that's one of my problems is that I think he is sort of committed to this strategy and committed to focusing on reform voters above everything else. I think Kemi is a more complicated figure. I'm not sure 100% know where she will end up as a politician. She's clearly an interesting figure. She's charismatic. She'll attract plenty of attention. And in that sense, that's a very useful attribute for a leader of the opposition. I do worry that she is too focused on the culture wars and fighting identity politics. And it's not that I have huge problems with her position as such. It's not quite mine, but it's not one that I find completely unacceptable. But I just think it's the wrong priority when the next election, I think, is going to be fought on the economy and public services as it normally is. And she is clearly an abrasive figure. And, there's lots of people who...
Her response to that this week was she handles stress better, wasn't it?
Well, we all handle stress in different ways.
There's an element that she's described as abrasive because she's female, and we don't often.
Have you not seen her in interviews saying she'll say in interviews she'll be sort of presented with something she said, and then she'll say, "Don't twist my words, don't misquote me," and then the interviewer will say, "No, I'm quoting you directly from this interview where you said this, this, and this," and she will have an argument with them about it. Like that is. That's not a gender thing.
Yes, I agree with.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
It's a fair point, but it's a fair question. But I think Rachel's answered it very well. And yes, there was an interview this week with Kate McCann, which was exactly that, where her own quotes are put back to her, and she does have a habit, it seems to me, of slightly going in sort of studs up on political opponents. And then someone comes back and you say, "Are you sure you stand by this?" And, well, that's not really what I'm talking about. Sometimes she says things which are quite edgy.
I don't disagree with this.
And then backs away and gets upset with interviews. And I was talking about the candidate I've just voted for. This is not terribly good. But during the general election campaign, where she only did sort of one media round, I think, in the course of it. And I remember listening to the interview that she did with Michelle Hussein, and it was just exhausting. And I was genuinely trying to work out what the policy was. You know, it was to do with gender identity. And again, I wasn't sure I was disagreeing with. I couldn't actually quite understand what she was saying.
Yeah, I remember the interview well. I'm not sure it was the finest hour for either of them, actually. It was very touchy. Very touchy, and you were just, it was one of those interviews where you almost wanted to switch off. Yeah.
And that's not great.
I mean, you have voted for Kemi Badenoch, and it's interesting you say the reservations about Robert Jenrick were to do with reform. I mean, another senior Conservative this week was quite a striking post on Twitter or X, whatever we want to call it now. So Gavin Barwell, Lord Barwell, Theresa May's former chief of staff, he said on Twitter or X, whatever we call it now, if Jenrick wins, the Conservative Party will, quote, go full Trump/Farage, attacking our institutions and promoting online conspiracy theories. I mean, you've profiled Robert Jenrick this week for the New Statesman.
Yeah.
Rachel, is that fair?
Well, the interesting thing about Robert Jenrick, and David's kind of alluded to it, is the conversion sincere and genuine? And is it more worrying for moderates, moderate Conservatives, if it is or if it isn't? Which is better, which is worse? Is it that he's very opportunistic and he has changed his policies based on what he thinks will help him become Tory leader and might change them again if it was convenient for him to do so? Is that better or worse than him genuinely holding these quite hardline views regarding immigration and sort of British institutions and the kind of reform Farage style of politics? Now, all the people that I spoke to who knew him and supported him said, no, it is genuine. He found the Home Office in ashes, is his words. It was just so dysfunctional. It would have radicalised anyone. They point out that when he was in Boris Johnson's cabinet and he went into housing as the housing secretary, he tried to be really radical there. He saw the planning system wasn't working. He wanted to rip it all up. Those reforms got shelved and Michael Gove was brought in and the Conservatives didn't build any houses. But then he went and did the same thing kind of in the Home Office. So yes, this is real. This is what he really believes and really thinks. But then they also say he's thoughtful. He's got a temperament that enables him to listen to other points of view and be a bit more nuanced, and therefore would perhaps make a better leader than somebody who goes in, studs up, all guns blazing, who can get into a fight in an empty room, etc., etc. And I don't know if you were worried about the reformisation of the Conservative Party, if you were worried about the way that there is some very ugly sentiment about immigration, diversity, asylum seekers. We've seen sort of some popular sentiment whipped up on Twitter and with the riots and over the summer. I don't know how worried you would be about somebody who seems quite authentic about wanting to lean into that. I can see why it's a difficult choice.
Just to point out that those Gavin Barwell comments were in direct response to a video that Robert Jenrick had posted where he's commenting on the new charges faced by the man accused of carrying out murders in Southport. I mean, watching that video, it was pretty outrageous. I mean, some of it was factually incorrect about the charges and I mean, it was proper conspiracy theorist stuff.
There have been times in this campaign, and this wasn't the first occasion, where I think his judgment has been really awry. We had this issue over special forces during the party conference. And I don't know whether he thinks this is what plays well with the audience he's after. Or whether he sincerely believes on this. I think he's sincere about wanting to focus on immigration, and I think he's sincere about the strategy on reform voters. But on some of these occasions, he is a clever guy. He is a lawyer by background, so some of the areas here he should be particularly cautious and be sensitive about them. I worry about that style of politics. And fundamentally, he has got this, whether it's a strength or a weakness, but as an attribute, as someone who generally comes across as being pretty sensible and what have you. Does it work with the voters that he's really after? To some extent, if you want what Jenrick is trying to offer, it just seems to me that Nigel Farage does that better. It's not, for a lot of us, it's not what we want anyway. But I just don't think he is an effective Farage replacement figure.
In answer to Daniel's question about who would make a better leader of the opposition, Jenrick, as David said, comes across as quite sensible. He can speak to journalists. He doesn't get into arguments. He is quite clear with his message. Whether or not that message resonates so much is another question. And he doesn't get distracted by whatever happens to be the leading topic on Twitter of the day. That's his strength as a leader of the opposition and somebody who can work with journalists rather than getting into fights with them. Kemi Badenoch's strength as a leader of the opposition, which I wrote in my profile of her, is that she's attention grabbing. She's box office. Her team said, if one of the struggles you have when you're in opposition is no one's paying any attention to you, they're paying attention to the government, Kemi Badenoch would make headlines. Whether they would be positive or negative for the Conservative Party is another matter. So I think they've both got strengths specific to the leader of the opposition role, but what you need to be a good leader of the opposition is quite different from what you need to be a Prime Minister in waiting.
Okay, one word answer from each of you to end. Who's going to win, Badenoch or Jenrick?
I think it's going to be Badenoch.
I think it's Badenoch, but by a slightly closer margin than people think it will.